Good afternoon, Yorkshire Classic Cars Ltd fans, and welcome to an overcast day in Retford, or near Retford. It's typical winter's day, it's quite mild, weirdly, but grey and shonky. If you're brand new to this channel, that will mean nothing to you, but if you have a look at my other videos, it may start to mean something to you. However, thought I'd do you a quick rundown today. This is a generic buyer's guide for classic cars. Now, you can't cover every classic car. I've done a buyer's guide. If you look through my previous videos, I'm not going to link it, but if you want to have a quick look, they're all there. There's a buyer's guide on Stags and the difference between the Mark 1 and the Mark 2. There's a buyer's guide on GT6s, Mark 3s, one on Spitfires, one on Capris, cars I know quite a lot about, really, if I'm honest. TR6s and things I haven't done yet, but when I get one in, I'll probably do one on one of those too. This is more a generic look at what you kind of need to consider, or what I consider when I'm buying or looking at on behalf of someone, which is something I did recently, a classic car. When I say classic, I mean something with some character, probably X years old. I don't quantify it as, oh, that's 1989, that's not a classic, or whatever. A classic car is something that's older, and it's got a bit of character. Part one. Number one. First most important thing, I always say this, is what you're looking for in a car. So are you looking for something to go out and tool around in, go to a few shows, it's presentable, it's solid, it's a tidy little car, you know, it's got an MOT, I would pass an MOT easily. Are you looking for a project? Are you looking for something to restore? Are you wanting to lock yourself in your garage and have it restored? Is it a car that means a lot to you? A lot of the cars I see and restore on behalf of people are cars that they cherish for some reason. It could have belonged to a relative who's passed. It could belong to just someone they love, or they could just love the car. Like my Capri, I love that car, that's it. Okay? So think about what sort of a project you want if you're buying something. If you want to start with a project, it will be reflected on value. If you want to start with something that's runnable, it will be reflected on value. If you're wanting just a show car, so you want to stand in the field and have it absolutely tip-top and as correct as perhaps a concourse car, don't get me started on concourse. Some stuff is concourse. However, you know, Stags didn't come with the stainless steel exhaust. They didn't all come with alloy wheels. They didn't come with wire wheels. They didn't come with wooden steering wheels, blah, 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 blah. However, if you wanted to do a show car, then again, that will affect the cost. Which brings me to point number two. Point number two is how much you've got to spend. Be realistic, okay? You need to be realistic. And you also need to wager your budget. And it's no use having a budget first. So if you want a Mark 1 Capri, you don't have the skills to restore it, you don't have the money to restore it, and you've got a budget of about £4,000, you're not buying a Mark 1 Capri, okay? If you want to buy a Renault 5, like my one outside, then £4,000 would probably buy you a really nice one at the moment. If you've only got £4,000, you just want a classic car, the world's your lobster, okay? Get out there, have a look on the internet, see what's available. But you've got to be realistic. If you're looking for a twin plenum Rover like this, and you've got £10,000 to spend, then chances are you get an okay one. Potentially, it might need some light work, but it needs to have some work done to be right. It might have a bad paint job. It might just have a little bit of rust in it. It might need an engine rebuild. But you've got to kind of budget to what you want. It's no use saying, I want an Aston Martin DB4. I've got £5,000 to spend. I've got £10,000 to spend. I've got £50,000 to spend. It ain't happening, okay? You've got to be realistic with what you want. We all have a dream car. Mine's my Capri, so I'm fairly catered for there. However, you've got to kind of think about what you're looking at. I'd love to buy another GTR. I'd like to be able to buy one to run around in. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He said he's got one, needs a load of work doing on it, but it's a running driving car, bodywork's bad, and he had a price in mind that fit my budget. Now, I haven't seen the car, so I'm not going to say, yes, I'll have it, because, everybody's idea of good is different. However, it fits within my budget, and that's a possibility. It needs paintwork, it needs some bodywork. That's what I do, so that's not a big deal. I am bothered about the paintwork being perfect initially. Once everything's solid, running, you can come to that at a later date. Digress. So, number 4. This this is a two-part one, really, with your budget. Obviously, you need to know what you're doing with it. Number 4 is don't be blinded by bling. So when you're purchasing a car, don't look at it and think, wow, those wheels are really cool and they're really rare. And then forget to look at the bodywork, forget to look at the paint, forget to look how well it runs. People do this. I've done this. Everybody does this. I bought a car years ago. Not going to do an anecdote for everything, but I bought a car years ago. I was blinded by the wheels. The wheels were cool as Christmas. I was blinded by the fact it was quite a rare version. It was a R32 GTR V-Spec 2. Very rare, one of only 1,303 in the world. And it had beautiful rotor wheels and these cut slick Deriza tyres on it. And I got so enamoured by them, I kind of missed the fact that the sills were rotten. The engine was on the verge of blowing up. And it ended up costing me a huge amount of money that I lost. Now, I wasn't buying that car as a collectible. I wasn't buying it to restore. I just wanted to use the car. It was going to be my daily. It ended up costing me a huge amount of money and left me a long way in debt. The tyres were undrivable on the road. Anyway, the minute it rained, you couldn't do over 25 miles an hour. So things like that. So don't be blinded by bling. Don't be blinded by things that look expensive, but they're aesthetic things. So big wheels, big tyres, are the tyres, are they any good anyway? Are they any good on the road? Are they legal? People can very easily be blinded by a lovely shiny spray job. And then when you look closer at it, it's like, well, that's wrong. Your body stripe's wrong. This is wrong because that's wrong, and so on and so forth. And it can end up costing you a lot of money, or more accurately, losing you a lot of money to have it done correctly. So that's number 4. Number 5. This is a good one. And I can give you an anecdote or 17 with this one. Don't buy the first car you see. Now, there are caveats to that. Obviously, if you're looking at a car that there's only 3 in the world, then you might only have to buy the first one you see, but that's very rare. If you're looking at Rovers, Fiat X19s, Skylines, Capris, Stags, GT6s, whatever, there are lots of them out there, okay? They're in various conditions. I'm trying not to break into anecdotes straight away. Sometimes the first car you see will be the best. And I've walked away from a car and gone, yep. And then, rung the guy up and went, can I come and have a little look, or the lady or whatever? And they've said, it's sold. And you think, damn it, I think I made a mistake there. But then another one comes up. So if I go back to the caveat and about what I just said about the guy with the GTR, I've been looking at a car on eBay. It's GTST Skyline. So the lower machine, it's a non-running project. It's well in my budget, potentially. I wasn't going to pay what he was asking for it. I was going to pay what I thought it was worth, potentially. I'll certainly make an offer to that. And then this guy comes along with the GTR. Now, if I bought that car that I've seen, even though it wasn't really what I wanted, it was just there, then all of a sudden, I wouldn't have been able to afford this other car, but this may never come off. But then another may never come off. Values are crashing at the moment. So you don't realise that stuff is all out there. You think, oh, God, I'm never going to see another. I'm never going to see another. I used to know somebody who just bought the first thing he saw whenever. I had a back axle for the Capri, a Jaguar axle. I took the differential out, managed to find it for, I think it was 75 quid, might have been 50 quid. And I took the Posi-Drive diff out, the power lock diff out. I'm not saying they're all out there for 50 quid still. This guy said to me, well, how have you done that? And I told him, and he went, all right, so how much do you pay for that? So, 50 quid. And he went, huh. And he went, rang me up and went, oh, I've got one. Didn't cost me 50 quid that. I had to pay 400 quid for it. I went, did you? He said, yeah, it was the only one on eBay. Yeah, you didn't need it tomorrow though, did you? It's kind of like that. If you wait and talk to people and stuff comes along. My projects have always been built, and I'm drifting off a bit here and I apologise, I'll come straight back, but I've always been built on a collect parts as you go along basis. So things like my Skyline sat there. The suspension on the roof, which you can see, was, if you bought it new, it's 1,700 quid's worth. I bought it off eBay, it was new, it had been left on a car, it had gone surface rusting. I won it on auction, I think, for £96. Something like that. So, you know, okay, I've had to have it sandblasted and resprayed. So I'm probably into it for about 300-400 quid at the minute, but that's a significant saving. It came up, it was there. Did I need it? No, I didn't. I needed 2 of the arms, that was it. The rest of it just came along for the ride. Was it worth having? Heck yeah. Things like the triple gauges that you get inside for the GTR, regularly on eBay for 400-500 quid. Probably now, there were 300, I think, last time I looked. Went to buy some parts off a guy, and I saw him after a set of triple gauges. He went, oh, I've got a set there, 40 quid, okay. I went, yeah, it is, yeah, chuck it in the boot of my car. So, you know, things like that. Parts for my Capri Raw was bought like that. You know, I used to go to the scrapyards. Remember the good old days when we had scrapyards in the UK? And, you know, one day there's a Capri 3 litre in there, gearbox in it, back axle's on it. So I bought the back axle and the gearbox for 50 quid. You know, they didn't come in very often, but it was there. The price was acceptable. And I bought it and I cleaned it up. I used the gearbox that went in my Mark II Escort, but the back axle, I just sold it on eventually. I used the diff out of it. I think I sold the casing for 100 quid. So, anywho, I digress. There is always something else comes along. So if you go to look at a Rover, even a rare one like this, twin plenum, and you think, you know, it's pretty rough, but should I? I haven't seen many come up. Don't worry. If you're not sure, walk away. Always take a breath. Something always comes along. Something better probably come along eventually. It's like buying a house. You don't always buy the first one you look at. If it's in your budget and it's definitely the one you want, then fair enough. But for me, I will err to the side of caution usually and walk away. It's the same with everything. Something usually better comes along, unless it's super rare. Number 6. Now, the previous 5 points, I make no apology for going through those first. Those are things you need to consider before you're even viewing cars, really. Well, number 5 is once you view cars, but they're all things you need to kind of be au fait with. It's no use looking at a Skyline. It's £35,000 and then you're scratching around for the money, you know. If you've got 33 and you can borrow a couple of grand off your girlfriend, then fair enough or whatever. But you know what I mean? You kind of need to be au fait with your budget, what you want to buy, what you're looking for. I'm going to not break into an anecdote there, but I know I was looking at an RS4 recently. Well, I say recently, a couple of years ago. And you know what? I said to my girlfriend, if I buy that, it's not a Skyline. It's not what I want. I'll end up a couple of months down the road going, I bought an RS4. Why did I use all our savings to buy an RS4 when it's not even what I want? So the next part is condition. And this is important. Now, condition depends on if you're wanting to do a mild restoration. Again, you need to have decided that first. If you want a car, you can just go out and drive. Again, you need to consider that first. I'll use a couple of examples. So the Rover here behind me, that is a twin plenum Vitesse SD1. Looks a little bit like a Ferrari Daytona to a blind man on a galloping horse. But if you look, it's very influenced by it. If you look at the indicator cutouts at the front and stuff. Now, this car here was bought as a project. The purchaser and owner of it currently knew full well it needed restoring. There was no point he bought it thinking, wow, that's lovely. I'll just go fill it with juice, wash it and drive it away. So he knew it needed welding. He knew it needed work. Okay. Now, if you were looking at, say, the little X19 on the ramp, okay, that is a super clean little car. All right, to look at. Okay, so it is a pretty blooming good example of one of those. If you ever dealt with old Fiats, they do have a reputation for rusting now. I don't think they're any worse than anything else back in the day. But if you start to look a little bit behind the wheels, you can see that the rust is starting to get into it. If you can see there on the strut, it's rusty. Oops, sorry about that. It's rusty. The brake pipes are rusty. You know, there's rust, the underseal's peeling around. Now, don't fret too much. That's what it's coming for me to do, is clean it and stop it getting any worse. Does it need welding? I think there's a couple of patches underneath, tiny little patches. I haven't cleaned them back yet, so I'm not sure they need welding. But on the whole, you know, for a 40-year-old car, pretty blooming good. But there is work needed on it. Now then, at a glance, if you look at that tie rod there, it's quite rusty. Now, at a glance, that car looks, with the wheels on it, all washed and polished, immaculate. And it probably is one of the better ones on example, I would suggest. It's very original. It hasn't had a lot of work done on it. But then when you delve a little deeper, it does need work doing. Now, the people who own this car have had it quite a long time. And it's driven around in the UK, and the rust is inevitable. That's just one of those things you're going to have to deal with. But it does need dealing with, and the costs are there that are being incurred. You can see that I've probably can't see from here, but I'm painting the cross members and things underneath. And I'm covering it up just with a little silver paint because we don't want to take the engine out and respray it as yet. But in a few years, it's going to need that. So you've got the spectrum where the Rover needs work. It's not a wreck. It looks dishevelled at the minute with all the trim and stuff off it, but it's not a wreck. The X19, which is a good usable car, but has a few little issues. And then that leads you to the Vega, the Facile Vega, which is a very rare car. Absolutely immaculate looking car. It's got a little dust on it from being in here, but it is an absolutely immaculate little car. It looks gorgeous. Every part of it is shiny. Every part of it looks perfect, except the gearbox didn't work and, you know, things like that. So even this that looks fastidiously restored still has a few issues with it and therefore associated costs. The Stag here, beautiful, beautiful looking car. Few issues with it, okay? The head gaskets were gone. The heads were stuck on. The Burgundy Stag, the bodywork at a glance looks immaculate. As you look closer, you can see it's full of filler and rust, okay? My car, well, it's just perfection on wheels, so we won't talk about that. But anywho, so what you need to do then is consider what that car is worth to you and what you're looking for. So all these customers know their cars need work. The X19 didn't, it's from use. The Vega was bought knowing it needed work, and the Rover was bought knowing it needed work. So, if I start you off with the Rover, you need to consider what work it needs. So we know this car needs work. But you need to sort of, it's difficult to say this, I don't know how to put this into terms, but you've got to reflect what it's worth to you with what work it needs. Now, if you're buying it thinking, well, it needs 10 grand's worth of welding, so it can only be worth £1,000, doesn't work like that, okay? But you do need to consider to you what you're prepared to pay and invest into it. You're never going to come out in front. If you do think you're going to come out in front, take that right out of your mind. It ain't going to happen, okay? So this car, for example, needs work. Now, on this car, he knows it needs sills. Now, the sills are this part here. The Americans call them rockers, okay? Absolutely no idea why. There is an outer sill here, as you can see it. On the inside, there is an inner sill. And some cars, some of the Triumphs have an inner sill. So they have the outer sill, a sheet of metal between, and then an inner sill. Austin 1100s have that. Stags don't, Capris don't. Some stuff does, some stuff doesn't. Doesn't really matter. You need to check these out. These are the most important part on any car. All right, and there is no way of looking at them just without looking. Now, you can see on this car, there's rust here. There's a rust hole here. Right, I've cut a bit out here and I've changed my tack because I need to explain to you what people describe on cars and what is horseradish or little white lies and what is actually true. Some people actually believe what they're saying and they're a little bit naive. Some people actually say it knowing full well it's a lie. When you see bubbling on a car, so you start to see these little bubbles here, and I'm going to zoom you in there. If you can see these little bubbles here on the paint, can you see those? I don't know if you can get an idea of those there. Look, can you see them there at the end of my finger? They're like little pinheads under the paint. Now, they're micro blisters, okay? They need the paint stripping from the car. Okay, what's happened there is moisture's got into the paint. Usually it's when you're spraying it. So when you're in your airlines, tiny little spots of water, because the air coming through the airline is hot. It condenses in the airline and fires a mist of water at the car, which then creates these little blebs. Okay, now then, sometimes you don't see those at all. Sometimes they appear as little blebs like that. And what you do is you flatten, polish it down in your 2-pack, and you don't see them anymore. And that's great. However, the primer underneath is porous. All primers are porous, okay? And what happens is, over the years, it forms a little speck of rust. That speck of rust then bubbles the paint up, and that's what becomes a micro blister. Micro blisters are a real pain, okay? You need a chiller for your spray gun and stuff like that to get rid of them. But the fact is, once they're there, that panel needs stripping to get rid of the micro blisters. And most cars do, older cars, because technology wasn't as good when people have painted them in the past, be it the original paint or subsequently, and you got to get rid of them. So that's an important consideration. They are not specks of dirt in the paint. They're not a shonky paint job. It's rust, and you've got to get rid of it. And when I say rid of it, you've got to sand it right out and sand that panel clean, and make sure they have gone. Dry sand it. That leads me to rust bubbles. Okay, so people will come along and go, it's just a rust bubble. It's solid underneath that. It's just bubbles in the paint. It's just a tiny bit of surface rust. But let me tell you, it is not. Okay, when you get rust bubbles like that, there's a honking great big hole under it, and that's it. Okay, rust bubbles like that are formed by the metal expanding as it rots. Okay, the rusticles appear, and it blisters off and leaves holes. Okay, for whatever reason, moisture, salt, stuff like that's got in behind the paint into the metal, and it's rusted it out. And that's it. It's no use saying, oh, it's just a bit of surface rust. Surface rust looks like that. Okay, it's brown, it's pitted, but it's fixable. Okay, but when it gets like that, 99 times out of 100, 9,990 times out of a million, 1,000, whatever, there's a hole behind it, okay? Whenever somebody says, it's just a bit of surface rust, you put a wire wheel on it and the hole will appear. I guarantee it, okay? So think about that. Now then, back to the sills, okay? The sills on any car, and I do mean any car, I don't even care if it's got a chassis under it, are structurally essential to that car. People will say, it's not structural. Oh, this rear wheel, it's not structural, just stick a bit of filler in it. Everything's structural on a car. It's why it has these swages, why it adds the folds, the bends, the curves. All that adds structure to the car. However, the sills are the most important part of that structure, inner, outer, all that section. So if these are rotten, they will definitely need doing. Not only is it an MOT failure, and you go, it doesn't need an MOT anymore, it's 40 years old. They need to be strong. Your life depends on it. The car will fold up like a pretzel if you crash it or anything. Eventually it'll bend in half. They are absolutely essential. And they need to be done properly. Now, I see lots of cars that are chock full of filler on there. The cars like this that have been a daily that was worth very, very little. And they've just bogged it full of filler to get it through the MOT every year. But if you're going to have a car that's right, any car, don't care if it's a user, don't care if it's a show car, whatever it is, they need to be done right. These sills, can't open the door. These sills extend right into the doorstep. Most sills do, okay, and they are available from Heritage, which is what that panel is in the car in the box. Okay, Heritage panels are excellent. A lot of British cars have got them their original specification and thickness, and all that needs to be changed and done correctly, braced, welded in. If the door gaps are something like, if the door gaps are good and it's been restored, they've probably been done right. If the door gaps are all, the door doesn't line up front to back, it's not the door, it's the sill usually or the floor that's wrong. But that is absolutely critical, okay? So make sure the sills are done if you're paying top dollar, okay? Make sure they're done properly. Make sure they are correct, all right? Everything should line up. The doors should line up to the sill should line up to the doors. Now, there is another caveat on that. You know, things like Capris, Fords, Rovers, they weren't made perfectly out the factory, but they should still be pretty blooming good, okay? There were slight, you know, probably more anomalies on Fords. There were, you know, creative with panel gaps, minis, stuff like that. But they shouldn't be a country mile off, okay? Good clearances, even gaps, square and aligned. It's no use saying, well, the door just needs twisting a bit. If these have been done wrong and you're paying top dollar for that car, or you're paying a large amount of money for that car, the chances are you won't be able to fix it. Okay? If they've got wrong and they say, the door just needs adjusting, no, it doesn't. Generally, no, it doesn't. So sills are crucial. Now, if it's complete resto, make sure you can get them. All right? Like the little Renault outside, you can't get sills for that car. All right? So there's no way of doing it. If they're short, and that's the end of it. So again, this is worth checking as well, the parts are there. Beyond that, the wings will have to come off to do the sills. Usually, a lot of cars like Stags and things, you can buy a lower section to put in here. Check the wings, check the inner arches. Okay, so this car has an inner arch to the wing. Things like Fords don't have that, but Stags, Rovers, they have an inner arch. And as you can see down there, it's got corrosion in it. Sometimes you will come to a car like the Stag I was looking at the other day, and somebody put new wings on, they cut the inner arch out and never replaced it. And that was it. There was just a great big gap all the way around the edge there. And yes, that made life a lot easier for them, but it needed welding back together, and that would have affected the paint and so on and so forth. The owner was aware. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, but that's also important. At the back, all cars that have come from the UK and probably everywhere in the world will rot round the rear wheel arches. This part here, okay, the strength on the end of the sill is excellent for trapping mud. The mud traps salty water, the water rusts it all away. Check the arches, inner and outer. Now this, you can hear is all steel. It doesn't go with a dump thud like a tyre when you hit it because it's full of filler. Check the inner arch goes round together. Check there is an inner arch and it isn't plugged full of filler. Okay, there should be a nice smooth arch, should be a nice, the inner arch should come out as far as the outer arch underneath, so that way. Okay, and that should be spot welded together, not somebody try to glue it or weld down the edges or anything like that. That should be spot welded through on just about every car you look at. The next worst place is here. Okay, again, mud traps, water, damage to the paintwork generally, especially with things like cellulose paint wasn't as hardy. Although I do like cellulose paint, it wasn't as hardy as two-pack paints. So, you know, the road rash gets under here, that lets the rust in and off it goes, as you can see. Once the outside's gone, the inside will have gone, I guarantee it. There'll be no inside left and outside gone. Not a chance, okay? That's the bulk of your issues, really. Beyond that, in the UK particularly, doors will go. Doors are a difficult thing to do. Things like door skins, people go, just needs a skin on it. Skins are hard to do, okay? To do properly and get that swage on there is very, very difficult. It is not really a DIY job. People have done it DIY and got it good, but getting it right is difficult. So for most cars, a good pair of doors is a blooming good advantage. So if you're paying top dollar, they should be good anyway. Make sure, as you look inside the door, you can see there, look, can you see where the skin is wrapped around? Sometimes there'll be a weld in this corner here, a weld in this corner here, but you can see that wrapped around, so it isn't plugged full of filler in there. Check the door bottoms. Again, be careful when you're doing this. Make sure it's not rusty and horrible and cutting your fingers. This one's gone on the skin down there. Again, things can be repaired, but it's cost, it's time, it's labour. Okay? Floors lead on from the sills. They will inevitably be rough. They will inevitably have had repairs. If they've been done nicely and it's solid, but not restoration quality, as in concourse quality, that just reflects on what you want to pay for the vehicle or what you want the vehicle for. Okay, so if you're just wanting a nice, solid, strong car, then that's probably fine. If you're wanting a show car, a concourse, or something you want everybody to look at and go, wow, then you want them right. This car's quite a rare car. Well, it's a very rare car. So obviously everything wants to be done to a point where you can't really see it's ever been repaired, which is what I'm doing with it, okay? As luck would have it, the floors and inner sills on this car are excellent. I don't think there's any rot in them at all, and I've looked on the outside, not the inside, so that's very lucky. Which brings me on to sunroofs. Sunroofs, take a good look at them. If your car has a sunroof fitted a steel one like this, which I consider the proper type sunroof, you can see there's an issue here. It dips down in the middle, and it's usually rotten. If it's rotten on the top, then the track inside is probably rotten, okay? Be very careful with sunroofs. They're a nightmare. They're not only a nightmare to fix or obtain, they're a nightmare to change as well. I had a BMW E30 that I rebuilt and resprayed. It was white and I did it gunmetal grey. And when I sprayed, I took the sunroof out to respray underneath the sunroof and underneath the tracks. The sunroof worked perfectly when I took it out. And I ended up having to make some brackets and bolt it in afterwards because I couldn't get the blooming thing back in. They're not an easy thing to do, and I don't even know who I would ask to do it for me. Some cars are easy, not many, okay? But if they've got a proper sunroof in like that, a steel sunroof, please be aware that they are absolutely terrible for rust. They scratch and things as they go in. It's just kind of manufacturing issues. So be aware of that. Next place to look, around here. Okay, so in these corners of the windscreen, scuttle tops here, wing tops, all this rusts quite profusely. You can see here that the moisture's got under the seal. Potentially, it's usually because the windscreen's been changed or out at some time. When they've put it back in, they've used a load of fairy liquid and or a metal device that scrapes the paint off as they've refitted the window. When I fit a window, I use a lot of sealer, okay? If I get them fitted by an installer, well, they do it how they do it, but they usually have plastic tools to put these things in. This one's got moisture trapped in there. Some of it will be condensation, but that is a good rot area. As luck would have it, this side isn't bad. It's pockmarked there and rusty, but quite solid. The other side was gone. And as you go across the car there, you see it's absolutely rotten in the middle. So that's another part to specifically look at a car in the UK. Inner wings, on this Rover, they're very good. Always check under things like brake servos because inevitably the brake fluid gets spilt as it's put in. It runs down the inner wing and onto the chassis rails and things like that. So it's worth having a look down there. This one's gone under here. Okay, but most of it is very good under here. As you can see, there's some surface rust, but it isn't bad. This isn't what I consider rust blebs, it's just holes, surface rust on there, okay? Other than that, you need to be looking at every panel. Why have I led off with welding? Welding is simply the most expensive part of the job, probably prior to the paint and then the engine. The welding leads to the paint, obviously. But welding is expensive to do and difficult to do, hence why it's expensive. Panels are expensive, and the skills needed to do good quality panel work on a car aren't like being able to weld your lawnmower back together. This is specific stuff. Now, I'm quite happy if somebody pays me an hour's labour to give them an hour's breakdown on welding, if you come here and give you a few tips and ideas on fabrication and welding, because you'll learn more doing it with somebody who knows what they're doing than watching videos on the internet. However, it's not something you learn in 15 minutes. I've been doing this 30 odd years, you know. Check the bodywork thoroughly. Anything that doesn't look right probably isn't right. Check for, you know, all the wheel arches, the sills, the inner arches, all that sort of stuff. Again, it doesn't mean you don't have to buy the vehicle. All it means is it should be reflected in the value of what you're paying, or maybe you want to get a better one. It will always cost you more money to restore a car than it will just to buy a good one. But, and this is the huge caveat, is making sure you've bought a good one. I've known loads of people buy cars going, well, I paid a bit more for it, but it's tip top. And again, 99 out of 100 have been ripped off. One guy did say to me, I've got this car, this Stag, 40,000 miles, never been welded out the factory. Obviously, it was welded at the factory. It's absolutely tip top. And I went, yeah, okay. I jacked it up and he was dead on. It hadn't, you know, it was kept in a heated garage. It was never used in the rain and it was absolutely perfect, top and bottom. But that's blooming rare in all my experience. So again, doesn't mean, you know, it isn't worth buying, but you've got to consider what you want it for, what you want to do with it, why you're doing the work, and so on and so forth. And maybe even time scale, really. Next, paint. Paint is one of those issues, you know. If you're going to have the car restored, if you're not having it restored, the paint needs to be good. If you're paying top dollar, it needs to be excellent. That means no runs, no fish eyes, no drips, no blebs of, you know, micro blisters in it. If you're paying for a car that's okay, I mean, the guy with the yellow Stag considers it all right. I consider it a really nice car. There's little tiny bits on it that aren't perfect, but it's a really good car. But if the paint is, you know, if it's been done because the car's been restored, then it needs to be tip top. If you're wanting a cheap job to get it on the road, there is no such thing. You know, they don't come in at £1,000 anymore. But what I would say about paint is if you're having it restored and then painted or just painted, make sure you do some research on your painter. Again, don't be blinded by bling. Don't walk in and go, ooh, it's shiny, isn't it? And then look at it and go, wow, look at the issues in that, you know. If you're happy with it, that's fine. Quite often I can see issues in paint other people don't see because I've done a lot with it, and not painting, but on cars that have been painted. And you've got to, it's no use saying to the guy, I want a perfect paint job. I've got £3,000, because it just isn't going to cover it, especially if you're doing the inside under the bonnet and blah, blah, blah. What I would say is if you're going to use a user, what I've done in the past when I've sprayed my own cars is done a cheap paint job, you know, got it okay, and then come back later on and done it again. My Capri, I did it myself. It used to be bright orange with stripes on. The whole paint job cost me £76. I borrowed a compressor off my dad. It came from Aldi. I bought a spray gun at a car boot sale for £5. Dad had a pressure regulator and water splitter, you know, a water trap. And the paint was, I think it was £22 a gallon back then. This is back in year 2000 and something, 3, I think. And I sprayed it myself, and it took a lot of work, and it wasn't perfect. There were bits of rust that I covered in filler. Because I just wanted to get the car done. I did it in winter. It was, you know, it was that time of year which you shouldn't be painting cellulose paint, which it was cellulose. I think it was probably about 60 coats on it. And you know what? It made several magazines, so it wasn't that bad a paint job. But I knew that it needed work in the future. And when I've done it green this time, it did last 10 years. I've done it green this time, and it needed a lot less work, apart from where it landed on its roof, but we won't go into that. Okay, so paint is something you have to establish for yourself, really. If you're happy with it, that's what matters, okay? If you're happy with the cost, the price, how it's been done, whatever, whether it will need doing, if you know a painter, blah, 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 that's all down to you. I can't tell you what to look for, really, on paint. So, I had to stop and have a sandwich there. Blood sugar going a bit low, diabetic. Right, running gears. Engines, running gears, gearboxes, axles. As you can see, the engine in my Capri is not the original engine. It is the engine it's had in there for about sort of 10, 15 years, but it's not the engine that came from the factory with it. It was a 1600, so it was a crossflow. Engines, as an overview, engines, you need to decide what you want with engines. So if you're looking at, again, a concourse car, it should have the original engine dressed originally. So things like Stags. I like to put a Stag Weber on them. If you look at Stag Weber's site, obviously he's not sponsoring the video, but he puts a 38D gas off a Capri on, does a conversion kit. Fantastic kit, makes the car sound better, go better, and better on fuel. It's just a win-win. Is it a modern carburetor? No. But it's still better than the Zenith Strombergs, which are old and worn out usually, and this is a brand new car you're putting on. But if you were going for concourse, Concours d'Elegance and you wanted to win shows, you're going to have to stick with the Zeniths. Do they work? Yes, they do. I don't think they agree with modern fuels, but that's something you'd have to decide on. If you're looking for a user, then maybe the car you've got has a different engine in it. So, for example, maybe a Rover SD1 has had a V8 put in rather than the original 2.3, or a Capri's had a 1600, maybe an overhead cam, or a V6, S6 or Cologne engine as an upgrade. All these things are fine. If the engine works, it works. Look for blue smoke, listen for tapping and rattling. Make sure that tapping and rattling isn't things like timing chains. Make sure belts have been changed if you're looking at overhead cam engines. It's no use saying it's only done 2,000 miles. Excuse me, there comes the bacon sandwich again. They need to be done on a regular basis. So, you know, if you've got a cam belt engine, as some classics now have, that needs to be done on a regular basis rather than on a mileage basis, because it might only do 2,000 miles in 20 years, you know, and the belt's 20 years old. And things like that are a lot cheaper to fix, to change before the damage occurs. So, for example, on my RB26 in the Skylines, you know, an engine rebuild, 15 grand, cam belt, a couple £100, you know, a bit of a pain to do, but a lot easier than taking the engine out and rebuilding it. You can only decide if you're considering engine swaps and stuff. If it's been modified and swapped, make sure it's been done properly, make sure the engine mounts are strong, make sure it's not just held together with bits of tie wrap and nylon rope and, you know, stuff like that. Make sure the exhausts are sealed, make sure it looks right, make sure it drives right and everything works. It's not clanking and rattling. I've seen countless GT6s, for example, where the engine mounts are a little bit saggy. The steering rack is so close to a GT6 sump, it's scary. It's, you know, it's like feeler gauge territory. As soon as the engine mount starts to sag a little, it'll rest on top. Some engines are difficult to get in, so make sure that, you know, it isn't jacked up ridiculously. Make sure they haven't modified the steering or the suspension because, excuse me, or the brakes, because they're more important than the engine. The brakes, steering and suspension have to work. But you're the only one who will know if you want a modified car. I had a 383 Chevy in my Capri. I've taken that back out and put a Rover in. The Rover's a very well-established conversion in the Capri. Does it affect the value? Yes, but you've got to decide whether you're looking for something that's going to make you money or hold its money, or whether you just want to use it, or whether you just want to park it up in a show. And again, I mean, I add to that again for the show thing, because you love it doesn't mean everybody else will. So if you look at a car and go, that looks absolutely god-awful, well, that's not their business, is it? You know, so you've got to consider those factors a little bit. The engine, if it's the original engine, or whether it's a modified engine or a changed engine, or if it's been tuned a little bit or whatever, just make sure it works. Make sure the oil pressure is good. Make sure the oil light goes off quickly. Okay, warm and cold. Make sure there's strong oil pressure. I had Skylines that were not great on the oil pressure. Ones that were hot. Try to make sure you see the engine run from stone cold. Okay. If somebody's brought it out and warmed it up a bit, the chances are it might not be burning oil, but it was when it first came out. It might also have been rattling its head off. Things like that you need to consider as well. Make sure it starts, you know, well. Also try to remember that carburetor engines aren't like fuel-injected engines. They're not quite as smooth. They're not quite as clean. So if it's a bit fuely smelling on the exhaust, burnt fuel, I hasten to add, that's kind of how they are. They don't have catalytic converters. They don't have fuel injection. Electronic distributors, things like that, great. If they're a good quality one. If there's something like some of the cheap Chinese generic things, you're better with points, in my opinion. But yeah, so things like this, if it's running and driving, that's great. Don't buy a dog rough car with dog rough bodywork because the engine runs. Because unless you're driving a Stag, chances are it will cost you less to rebuild the engine than it will the bodywork. Okay? A Rover V8 engine rebuild, probably a couple of grand, tops, parts and labour. 1300, 1600 crossflow, similar sort of price, 2 to 3 grand. GT6 engine, maybe 3 grand with the parts. You know, engines are cheap to build. Don't dispel a car. If the bodywork is immaculate but the engine is toast, don't always look at getting rid of it. Don't assume it's going to be cheap to rebuild. Some engines are not. Some engines are rare. Some engines changed over the time. So Rover V8s have changed. They've lost the distributor. They've changed the oil pump. The Chrysler for the Facel Vega, the early engine didn't fit with the later gearbox. But majority of engines are quite cheap to rebuild. So that's not always a thing to dispel a vehicle for. If the bodywork is good or marginal, but the engine needs rebuilding, you know, some things don't fall for the obvious. Oh, it smokes a bit. It's the valve stem seals. Yeah, it could be, but not in my experience. It's usually the piston rings. Check it isn't venting out the rocker cover, you know, the cam covers, the valve covers. Take the thing off, the filler cap off, and just feel the pressure in there. Feel the pressure from the dipstick. If you take the dipstick out and put your finger over it, is it pressuring? That means your piston rings are worn out. Again, it's not insurmountable, but it may need rebar, which will then need pistons and blah, blah, blah. It may just need piston rings and a deglaze. Again, it can all be fixed, but it affects the value of what you're looking for and whether you can just go out and use it. Now, if you're going to drive a car to shows and you're going to do 300 miles in 10 years, does it matter that it burns a little oil? You know, it's probably not the end of the world. Check it's been serviced, check that there's oil in it, check that the oil is fresh. You know, if it's doing low mileage, it needs the oil change probably more often than doing, say, 2,000 miles a year because it gets condensation and muck in there. Look at things like fuel lines have been changed for modern fuel hoses that are compliant with modern fuels. Check there's antifreeze in it. Now, I'm referring back to Stags again, as I know Stags. Most classic cars will have a blue glycol in the UK. Abroad, they use all sorts of different stuff. People commented on one of my last videos about one of the buyer's guides I did. In the UK, it should probably be a blue glycol. If it's an all-aluminium engine, I can't remember. The modern pink stuff does not agree with classic engines. There's no two ways about it. I don't know what the pink stuff is. I can't remember, but there's something different about it. I put that in my Skyline engine. It looked pretty cool and it was fine. Excuse me, cast iron block. Probably shouldn't have put it in. All these things are, check it's the right one for the car. So obviously if you're off to look at a Rover SD1 with a V8 in it, just look at what antifreeze it should have in it. It's no use looking at what grade of oil it's in because it's no use once it's been running. It should be a 2050. I hasten to add a 2050, a good quality 2050. But check, you know, if the X19 says it must have the pink antifreeze in, check it's got the pink antifreeze in, because if it hasn't, the chances are it'll have corroded inside or block things up. And also changing it isn't a straightforward job always. You need to rinse the hoses, the heater matrices out and all that sort of stuff. Because if you mix the two antifreezes, it can turn to jelly. I've had that where I've taken an antifreeze out, put a new antifreeze in, and it's jellified inside. So I've ended up having to power flush it and use engine flushers. Again, all possible, but you just got to consider costs. Transmissions, gearboxes, expensive to rebuild and a pain in the backside. But again, if it crunches when you change from second to third, but if you do it steadily, it's fine. Well, how many miles are you going to put on it? You're not going to do 50,000 a year. It might be okay. Things like LTs in the Rover V8s, they've quite often had the wrong oil in them. I believe it's ATF in them, but I'd have to check again. You know, make sure the ATF oil, if it's an auto, is clean. Make sure the gearbox changes gear as it should. Make sure the kick down works, stuff like that. Kick downs are essential for automatic transmission function. Make sure it's not puddling oil underneath, you know. Oil leaks are usually serviceable. My Rover V8 used to leak oil. I rebuilt the engine, it leaked oil. I just gave it up as a bad job. What I did find was it spattered the underside of the car in oil all the way down and it never rusted again. So, you know, diffs, usually serviceable yourself. Things like Jaguar diffs are quite difficult, 4HAs, 4HUs. But it is possible, okay? If you get it wrong, you get it wrong. As long as you don't get it wildly wrong, you'll be all right. But diffs shouldn't grunge, clonk. If they whine on acceleration, they're usually too tight on mesh, I think. If they whine on deceleration, they're usually too loose on mesh. I could be the wrong way around on that. I'd have to check. But your synchros need to be good. You know, it doesn't kick out of gears, blah, blah, blah. Gearboxes are very expensive to rebuild. You're looking at a minimum of £1,000 in parts and labour to do the box. Whether it's plus removal and reinstallation, I don't know. But, you know, they're never an easy thing to rebuild. A So they need to be good. Clutches, depends on the car. If you look at something like the X19, the clutch on that would be a nightmare, purely because of where the engine is. The clutches on things like Spitfires, you have to take the gearbox out through the car. So again, it's difficult. But then it has hydraulic systems. So the hydraulic systems should all work for the clutch and stuff. Basically, with the engine, transmission, clutches, things like that, diffs, it's all fixable. You know, an exchange diff, I think, for a Stag is like 400 quid. That's probably cheaper than paying somebody to rebuild it. Is it a DIY job at home to change? Maybe. It's not an easy job. But, you know, it's all possible. Used parts are out there, as I said before. You know, Capri axles aren't sat in scrapyards anymore. Jaguar axles aren't, Skyline axles aren't. But, you know, knowledge and experience is out there. But again, check that it is available. If, say, you look at a car, you know, go off, have a think about it. And check, you know, think, that diff doesn't seem right. Are they expensive? Can you get parts to have it done? Ring somebody up, say, I've got a Stag, the diff's whining, it's moaning under acceleration and plonking. Could you rebuild it? Give us an idea of cost or whatever, you know. So it's all just reflecting on what you want to pay for the vehicle. So, having finished my sandwich and considering a cup of soup, in conclusion, don't let me put you off buying a classic car. Classic car ownership is great. Whatever you want, Triumphs, Fiats, whatever really. There's always a classic car out there for you. There's always something in your budget, you know, like the little Renault I've got, you know, it'd be dirt cheap when I sell that. Just put an MOT on it. But, you know, it's still a classic car. You can still turn up to a show and be involved with a group of like-minded people who are great to get on with. You know, you can go out in it, you can just tootle around and enjoy it. Will it cost you money to maintain it, look after it? Yes. Will it cost you ludicrous amounts? No. But you do need to consider that before you buy one, really. But then you can always sell it again. I think classic car ownership, or custom car ownership, if you like, or hot rods or whatever, you know, older vehicles, character vehicles, is great. I really do. You stop in a garage, somebody always has something positive to say to you. Some will have negative things to say to you, but you know, that's life. So to sum up, what you want, what you can afford to spend, what you're looking to achieve, whether you want a driver, a runner, what it's going to need to fix. As I said previously, and I stand by this, it's no use saying I've got £10,000 and going out and buying that Rover for £8,000, because it's going to need more than £2,000 to fix it. And further caveat to that is, don't ring me and say, I'm looking at a Rover, it's got some rust, it's going to need a bit of welding, what do you reckon? How much would it cost to fix it? I'll send you some pictures. You know, it's impossible, it really is. Why I charge by the hour, because every job is more involved when you get into it. Think about what you want to do. You know, I've looked at loads of classics myself recently, Skyline, stuff like that. I like to buy a car in the summer and tootle around. Excuse me, I never spend more than about £4,000. Well, it sounds a lot of money, but it really isn't these days. You don't get much for that. And I tootle around in it. You know, I've had 350Zs, I've had all sorts. I've been looking at Subarus, but nothing's in my price range at the moment that's any good. I went to view one, it was horrible. It looked like they dug it up off the ocean bottom. At a glance, looked great. So what I'd recommend is establish your budget, establish what you want, and establish what you can afford to get in that, and whether that fits what you need. That's the crucial thing. After that, condition is critical. Purely because of what you're going to spend. You need to tie that to your budget. As I say, you're not restoring a car for £5,000. Would you get a pair of sills put on that for £5,000? Yes. Okay. Would you get the paint on top of that for your £5,000? Probably. But just doing the whole car and saying, well, I've got £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, it's not happening. No, not to a good standard. There are probably garages out there that will scab it back together for £5,000. But then you'll be looking at doing it again in a couple of years, okay? So consider your skills, consider what you want from that car. If you're looking for an investment, I probably wouldn't waste your time. Not using cars, you know, they go downhill. So again, without repeating myself, you know, investment is a faux pas on these. If you can buy a perfectly good Rover SD1 twin plenum Vitesse for £1,000, somebody says, look, just take that car. So, well, I think it's worth more than that. Go, no, just give us £1,000, take it. And you buy it and it's immaculate. It's worth 15 grand, you're going to make money. But other than that, you know, you need to be quite a shark to find stuff like that. It's never happened to me. So yeah, enjoy it. Don't get the wool pulled over your eyes. There's always another. If it seems too good to be true, it usually is. You know, if something seems immaculate, everybody's idea of immaculate and everybody's idea of great is different. I see many, many cars that say they're immaculate, and when I look closely under them, they are not. And that's all I'm going to say about that. However, you know, that needs to be reflected in the cost and what you want from it. You know, if you're not bothered about immaculate, you just want something you can use, just light maintenance, then, you know, that's probably the way to go, in my opinion. But if you want something to restore to perfection, to have it sat in your house, your garage, wherever, looking beautiful in your conservatory, it'd be a really good choice. Then again, you know, get whatever you want. It doesn't have to have an engine in it, just lower the front spring. But anyway, so I hope that's helped you. I hope that gives you some advice. Obviously, it's a very open-ended sort of a video, really. There's a lot of probably questions leading from it. So if you've got any questions for me, please feel free to comment. If you like the video, feel free to comment. If you don't, feel free to comment. It won't change my mind. Thank you to the person who dislikes every video I put out. I do like that. It does make me titter. If you've liked it, please like it. If you haven't liked it, please like it. If you haven't considered subscribing, please do. It does help me out a lot, and I really, 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 really do appreciate it, and it makes you feel a bit more positive about your video. Thank you for that. Take care, and good luck classicing.